Thanks, Paul. It's nice to be here. Sorry about the voice. I've had a little bit of a cold. Um, but happy to be here. It's a very impressive place. Wasn't doing too great yesterday, so I couldn't make it yesterday, but I'll definitely watch the videos and plan to watch the rest of the presentations. I wrote my first book in 1982, really 83 and 84. It took me 3 years to get it done. It was a book on drills. I didn't think there was a drills book. I knew there wasn't a drills book out there, and I've been to see a lot of great teachers. I saw a lot of great drills. I've been teaching a lot myself. I thought it was a really good idea. But by 1985, I was ready to have the book. I did everything, all the writing, the pictures, put it all together, had the manuscript. In New York City, I was working in New York, a lot of publishers. I brought it down in 85 to different publishers. There's the big guys, Random House, Simon & Schuster, but there's a lot of small publishers. I made appointments, went in, showed them the book. Nobody wanted it. Same thing in 1986. So I had the book done. Nobody wanted the book. Finally, in 1987 at the golf show, I brought it to the golf show. And I brought it over to the Golf Digest booth there, and Jack McKinnon was there, who did books for Golf Digest. They brought out a book or two every year. I showed him this manuscript. He loved it. He said, "We're going to do this book." I couldn't believe it. So right away, showing him in a very short period of time, he said, "We'll do the book." So it took 5 years for me to get that done. And I know a lot of you have written papers and books and research, et cetera. And sometimes it takes you a while to get it done right to where somebody will publish the material. And that book ended up going through 17 runs. It sold over 200,000 copies. So finally, when I got it done, it worked. And I'm going to refer to that as I go through this talk. Just a little background. I'm going to go through a few things how this happened. I started teaching in 1975 at Westchester Country Club, and I used this camera. It's a sequence camera, and you pulled out a strip of prints. It had eight videos on it. There's a little dial there you can see on the side. You can adjust it, and you could get 4 backswing, 4 downswing pictures, and you can kind of see how I moved to the 8-step swing. Now, the 8-step swing came out of notes and a journal, and I kept writing down what I learned from going to see great teachers. I took more lessons, I'm sure, than any teacher, personal lessons where I went to see them, and I would do a tape, or I'd videotape them, or I'd just write the notes. So these notes started, coming together as a giant amount of work, maybe 800 or 900 pages of notes. I finally gave those notes. Well, I had a guy, Dave Collins, who came to work for me at Sleepy Hollow. I had gone from Quaker Ridge to Sleepy Hollow, and he was fanatical. This guy was unbelievable, and he had a computer, which I didn't have a computer in the 80s, and this is 1989. He put it all into his computer, and he kind of organized it a little bit, and he said, this is a book. This should be a book. I gave it to a writer, David Gould. He's a tremendous writer, and he took all of this tremendous amount of disparaging stuff and put it together into a book. And he said, I like the idea of using the positions, the eight positions. And he said that should be the centerpiece. And then later I gave it to, he put it together, and John Androsani kind of put it together, and we came up with this book, The 8-Step Swing. And in the 8-step swing, I had positions that I started to work with. I did a video with David Glenz in 1986 on the 10 fundamentals of the golf swing, which we did a lot of the body work, et cetera, on the video. The positions, a lot of teachers have done positions before, but the guys that I saw, I grew up in Seattle, Washington, and the golf machine started in Seattle. So I've been to see Homer Kelly at his house, and Ben Doyle's a good friend of mine. I played with him, and Ben Doyle really brought the golf machine to the world. And they had, Homer had his positions, and it was really cool talking to him about that and looking at these positions. But I didn't like the positions. I was doing a lot of work. I'm going to get into this a little bit more here. I was doing a lot of work with video, and I needed to stop that video in certain positions to see what I needed to work on with people and how to study golf swings, how to do the research. So I felt like these positions, which were 12 positions that I've taught to my teachers forever, there's a couple, well, Trillium's here. She knows that. And I'm going to talk to you a little more about position teaching, but I'd also been to see Jimmy Ballard quite a bit. He had 7 key positions that he used, and the golf machine had their positions. And I worked with John Gerstein, who taught Johnny Miller and Mike Reed, and he had 5 key positions that he worked. And I love that idea of being able to know what to work with at different positions. But the difference that I did in the 8-step swing was using parameters or corridors that I worked on for a long time to see where the swing should be. And what's more important, the body or the club? This is a position, just a simple drawing down the target line, looking at a backswing corridor and then the corridors from into the backswing based on Hogan's idea of a swing plane, the shaft plane, which a lot of teachers had used at address, and then of course the impact plane being the most important idea of where the club is at impact, based on to see what the golf club is doing in the golf swing. So that's just a simple drawing, and we could talk about this later if you wanted to ask some questions. Oh, there we go. One big part of the 8-step swing was the elimination theory. That was an idea of taking things away. So we go to the range, we take the golf course away, things get easier. If you take away the range and go indoors, take away the golf balls, take away the club, take away the arms, you're left with the engine of the golf swing, what the body's doing in the golf swing. So that really helped me as far as understanding and looking at movements, body angles, upper center, lower center, how it moved in the swing. And then this guy, Carl Welty, Terry Rolls just mentioned him in the presentation they did. So I met Carl in 1969 when he came to Seattle. He worked for Paul Runyon, who's of course a major champion and a great teacher of his time at La Jolla. And he came up to Seattle to open up Sahali Golf Club for Mr. Runyon. And then I was playing pretty good in that area, and Carl, who I would learn was maniacal about filming people, and he did it with an 8mm camera at that time. So it took 2 weeks to get the film back, and it was great for me to see it. You know, I had won some tournaments in the Northwest, and it was fun to look at the swing. And he had a little reel that he rolled on, so it was pretty primitive, but it would show the swing. It was really cool. And then Carl was just, it's hard to explain Carl Welty, because I'm sure he was on the spectrum, you know. He could stay in front of a computer for 12 or 14 hours, or the video, and watch video nonstop, day after day after day after day. And we became really good friends. I would stay with him out at La Costa. He had his own golf school at La Costa. And we did a lot of work together. He was taught on his filming by a man named Bill Glasson. And Bill graduated #1 out of MIT. He was an engineer for Howard Hughes. He worked pretty closely with Howard Hughes, at Hughes Aircraft in San Diego. And after he retired, he was kind of coerced to go work with Golfcraft. And at Golfcraft, he designed the first iron byron machine that could hit a ball 280 yards. Pretty impressive guy. He also had this really cool stuff at his house, where guys like Jack Nicklaus came to his house to do this strobe lighting, and he did a cover piece for Golf Digest. But he taught Carl how to do research, basically, and where to put the camera. It was Glasson's ideas on how to film, and Carl was certainly the right guy to do it with. And he passed away in 2018, but he was a fantastic friend of mine. We talked on the phone all the time. I stayed with him all the time. I had my school at PGA West, and Carl ended up teaching for me for a lot of years there at PGA West. I could talk about him forever. Richard Feynman had a quote that I've loved, which was, "Never confuse education with intelligence. Education is what they teach you in school, the ability to repeat and recite." So like an actor can look like Albert Einstein in the movie, you can be an astronaut, you can be anything, because you can recite, you can remember. And I know people can memorize pages out of the golf machine and sound great, but intelligence is the ability to solve problems. And that's what I thought Carl Welty, that's what I learned from Carl, was the ability to try and take the information, study this stuff, and then try and determine what's happening. This was big for us, for me, as the Betamax, 1979. I went down to Crazy Eddie's in New York City and got it there. Carl had them. We used two. We had two VCRs, two TVs, and we could do comparisons that way. And that was a game changer. And I'll tell you, it was fantastic. I mean, you could do 10,000 frames a second with this old technology. I know the things the things we have now are better, but it was pretty good. It was pretty good. This was the camera we used, Sony camera. We used the camera at a certain height and a certain distance. I'll be going into that. This is the Bill Glass and Welty way of filming, where you're far enough behind so you don't have the distortion. He liked the idea of being way back if you could, but at least we would go 10 yards back, straight down the target line. Pretty easy to put the camera and a ball in the target and not look at the player. So that's how I could determine a lot of these setup angles. I just listened to Phil and Terry talk about the right arm being further out and the shoulders open and those sort of things. But that's the kind of stuff you could pick up a lot of information by filming consistently, doing it the same way all the time. Now, like they had a great place like this. When you're indoors, you have fixed cameras. Every time you come in, it's the same thing. That's good. So this is filming. Carl was like, when I would film, he would yell at me if the framing wasn't perfect. You know, it had to be just right, or he went insane. He couldn't stand it. So all my instructors have listened to me yell at them. I have an assistant every year. Sometimes they last longer than that with me, that I train them, and they do a year with me on everything that I do, all the schools, all the lessons, all the talks, everything. This is an example of how we drew on the TV. So Carl learned that you could take a dry erase marker and go on the TV. So we would draw on the television at different places. This was obviously an address and impact being radically different, which, a lot of people thought you'd kind of return to impact way back. We all know that's not right now. So there's a lot of differences. But drawing on the TV was just revolutionary, and we didn't tell anybody about it for a long time. I eventually told a few people, but we did all these studies kind of secret, that's kind of funny the way we did it. We'd listen to a few other people talk about the newspaper. Once the information's out, you just throw the newspaper away. Everybody knows it. 1987, I was writing for Golf Illustrated, And I wrote this swing left to swing right, but that was based off, the information we were looking at of how the body was rotating through impact and how the club would stay in front of center, moving back up the swing plane. The first X I did was this, and that was drawing on the television, just drawing tour players. We filmed the PGA Tour. That's what we did. And we had access. La Costa, we had the Tournament of Champions. Doral, we had the tournament. Sleepy Hollow, I had a senior tour event. Westchester Country Club, for 5 years, we had a pro tour event. So I started drawing these lines on the shaft going up and down. And, you can see that virtually everybody is lowering the shaft, shallowing the shaft, laying the shaft off. But it wasn't everybody. There were a few, Raymond Floyd, who ripped it way inside, flat, got steep in the shaft, and Mickelson. So there's a few outliers, but pretty much that was pretty solid information right there. There's a few examples. Ben Hogan, of course, I love that picture. It's the first picture that Anthony Ravielli wrote in the book, or drew in the book, with showing the engine of the machine in the center of the body, how things transferred out to the golf club, the power generation in a sequential way. I thought Hogan's book was phenomenal. I've probably read it at least 500 times. I keep reading it and learning more stuff and rereading it about how the muscles worked in the swing. And written in 1957. That book was pretty much written in 1948 when he wrote the Power Golf. So Herbert Warren Wind, of course, one of the great writers, wrote beautifully in 5 lessons. And I felt like I learned so much from reading that book, but then I'd also worked extensively with guys who knew Hogan really well, who were great players and great teachers. And that would start with me with Jackie Burke in Houston, who was a Masters champion, a PGA champion, and taught a lot of players. I played a lot with Jackie. He's like a second father to me. He's 99 years old. I'm going to his 100th birthday coming up in January. He's a great friend of Hogan. He and Jimmy Demaret opened champions together. Demaret and Hogan were best friends. So I got to talk with Demaret too, but mostly Jackie on Hogan's ideas. And then Ken Venturi, played probably 200 times with Venturi, 30 years working with Kenny. And then Claude Harmon at Wingfoot. And then when I was a pro at Tamarisk in Rancho Mirage, California, he was right across the street at Morningside. And I had lunch with him every week, just pounding him with information. He loved, he's another guy that was an early film guy. And he loved Hogan, man. And all these guys that ever saw Hogan play, and that would go back to even to Gary Player right now, and Nick Price and other guys that are still playing, of what Hogan was like and what it was like to watch him. And then to get his writings and his ideas. Now, Brandel Chambly thinks that's the worst book ever written. So I had a big thing with Brandel on that, but he loves controversy. He likes mixing it up. We know that. But I've had a few things with Brandel I'll talk about with the X Factor. But that led me into this idea of hanging in there. I wrote an article for Golf Magazine. I started with Golf Magazine in 1990. And I think Matt Rudy's here from Golf Digest. The magazine wants a miracle on every cover. They want a sensational piece. So I thought I had a great piece, and it was called The 4 Turns in the Golf Swing, on the backswing. I sent it in. I'm sending them a lot of stuff, but that was my #1 article I wanted to do. Got nothing back for 6 months, 0. So I called George Pepper. I said, you know, George, I think this is a great article. He said, it's too complicated. It's just not, it's not going to work for the magazine. But if you want to, you could come down and we'll meet with the writers here in New York. Drive down, you can explain what you want to do. So I drove down to New York a few days later. I met with the team, explained to them about these 4 turns in the backswing, of how to generate power. This was a power idea. So George is there and he says, too complicated, we'll do 2 turns. He said, which ones do you want? So I said, well, we got to do the shoulders and the hips, because that came out of Hogan's book. And Hogan had said 45 and 90. So I knew that wasn't right. I mean, it was okay, but I thought the guys on the tour turned more than that. Turned the shoulders more than that. Maybe the hips more than that too. So we come up with the 2 turns. And John Andrusani, in the meeting, we said, what are we going to call the article? He says, well, it forms, when you're looking down, it forms the letter X. What do you think about the X factor? I said, yeah, that's okay. We'll do the X factor. And it came out in 1992. And amazingly, while I'd, all this stuff out of the, no, not all the stuff, things out of the 8-step swing it's the prelude. I wrote about the 4 turns and rotations and all that stuff in the 8-step swing. So it pretty much was just carried on into this article. Now, I spoke in California, and Michael McTagg was the assistant pro at Bel Air, and he called me right during this time. He called me in New York, and in New York, and he said, I have a machine that can measure rotations. He said, I listened to you talk. I'd love to show it to you. I said, well, Mike, I'm doing an article right now on the rotations. Why don't you bring it out? I was doing Sleepy Hollow and Doral at that time, both jobs. I did Sleepy Hollow in the summer and Doral in the winter. Come out to Doral and we'll put it on the tour players, because maybe this will work for this article I'm doing. Yeah, so he came out, and back then, it's not like the tour now. Back then, we could get a lot of people to do things. On the tour right now, Chris would say there's no way you could get a tour player to probably come down with another teacher and do research. But they did. And the main guy for me was Peter Jacobson I was working with, and Peter has like an unbelievable personality. Everybody loved him. So he just corralled guys to come down. And we got tons of players to come down and put the SMT machine, Sports Motion Trainer, on. And that gave us information. Now, it was a gyroscope. It did a deal around you. It's a little primitive compared to what we're doing now, but it was pretty good. And it spit out all these numbers. And we did the article, and it was the all-time best-selling golf magazine articles cover piece. So that was pretty cool. And then I think this is going to play. I don't know. Maybe. Click again.
I don't think any of us at Golf Magazine anticipated the tremendous response. Readers from all over the country wrote to us to thank us for shedding new light on the golf swing. And our newsstand sales are the highest ever for a December issue. Needless to say, we're going to be doing more articles on the X Factor.
So this is the SMT machine. That was X Factor 2. So now we're doing this as the second article. That was taking the X to impact. And we talked about where the rotations were at impact. So with the differential between the shoulders and the hips was starting to close down, but the hips were still in front of the shoulders at impact. Excuse me?
Is that Mike McTeague?
Yeah. Yeah, that's Mike. I kind of lost track of Mike. He started, I don't think, he got into the business. He's a smart guy. That smartly got out of golf and went into making a lot of money doing something. Finally did the 4 turns. And that was the third one, the third X Factor article right there. And that was Tom Kite on the cover. It took Kite winning the U.S. Open to get my 4 turns thing on there. But I started working with Kite. I've worked with him before, but in the beginning of 1992 out at La Costa, we started working in 1992. I worked the entire year with Tom. We worked a ton. I flew with him to tournaments. And he won the U.S. Open that year. It was really cool. And one of the fun night dinners I've had in my life was with Ben Crenshaw and Tom Kite on Monday night after he won the U.S. Open. With Tom, I played with Tom in college. He was at Texas when I was at the University of Houston. But Tom had a lot of knee sliding, and he'd had a bad 1991. He wasn't in the Masters for the first time in 1992. I really got him to, straighten up that left leg and stop that excessive leg action going forward, and he picked up a lot of distance. Probably the most nervous I was watching it on TV at Pebble Beach, and he had a 2-shot lead. I don't know if he played Pebble Beach, but that 18th hole's pretty scary. 2-shot lead in the Open, and I'm thinking maybe hit an iron out there and just kind of play along, and he took out that driver, and I just left the room, and we drove it down the fairway anyway. That was fun. This is out of the X Factor book. This was the 4 turns in the swing. Would be the knees, the hips, the shoulders, and the head. So it was kind of an interesting thing that I wrote about, that the knees, of course, don't turn, but if you put a line across the knees as you go back, you have an angle there. So this was like 25, 50, and 100. It was kind of like a nice geometrical move up the ladder, and then the head having its own swing. There are a number of things in the X Factor that really got off from what I actually wrote in the book. The resistance in the lower body. So I didn't like the idea of straightening the right leg, of unweighting the right leg and having lift. I thought you should have pressure into the ground. But I wrote 5 pages on lifting the lead heel in the book. 5 pages. That would be another thing with Brandel, that of the great players that lifted the left heel. But the fact was that most players in the tour weren't lifting their left heel. So that's going to come a little later here when we go to the studies that we do every year of at least 100 guys on the PGA Tour, a lot of times the entire tour, of what different things, what parts are doing whatever in the swing. How many guys are lifting their left heel, how many are not lifting the left heel. So that was the argument for lifting the left heel, right out of the book, 1996.
People have been taught,
Okay, here we go.
been taught or think that there are 2 turns in the golf swing. They look at the shoulder turn and the hip turn, but really there are 4 turns in the golf swing. And I'm going to do those from the ground up. First we have the knees, then we have the hips, then we have the shoulders, and finally we have the head that also turns and moves to the right in the backswing. Now let's take a look at the 4 turns using graphics. Watch the backswing and notice how the 4 turns line up at the top. The knees have turned approximately 1/2 of the hips, while the shoulders have approximately doubled the hip turn. The head shifts and rotates slightly to the right. If you take out any of those 4 turns, you restrict the potential of your body.
So that's from the 1994 VHS tape. That's a long time ago. But that was the article that I started with, that kind of started the X Factor ideas. That's the tape. Then the Golf Channel came about in 1995. It was kind of, it was fun. Arnold Palmer and Joe Gibbs hired me as one of the first teachers, and I did 10 years with the Golf Channel. But I just put that up because I did a 10-part series on the Golf Channel on the X Factor, which was worth 10 half-hour shows. That's the book. That came out in 1996. So it came out kind of in reverse order. Things kind of happened with articles, and then the tapes, and then finally the book. And the book had a lot of measurements in it. How things moved, what was the most and least that we saw on our studies. Now there were a few central pictures in the book, illustrations, and Jim McQueen did the illustrations for me. He did all the illustrations for Jack Nicklaus and all of Nicklaus's books. He was a great guy, tremendous artist, talent. I spent a lot of time talking to Jim because he was really detailed. He wanted to know what do you want in these main pictures in the center of the book. So this is probably the most important, I think, the most important one in there, and it's got some different things that I worked on with Jim. One was pressure, and remember I'm talking about the driver here, of course, power swing. I'm not talking about 8 and 9 iron, so this is power full golf swing. But pressure going down, I knew that in the right foot when you started down, that you just didn't get on over too quick forward. The blue dot where it's moving forward, the shoulders going back. And then despite what Brendel said, as the shoulders turn, the lower body reverses direction, the X factor differential or gap is increased. So I think I said that, Trillium. I think it's in writing there. But I think that was an important thing. I think that idea of how the pressure goes down a little bit on that back foot with the driver at that part is important, that it's not straight over to the left. The head, lateral movement is in all directions, but I looked at 6, up, down, right, left, out and back, and no tour player keeps their head steady. So the main thing, the number one fundamental in the golf machine was a fixed center, with Homer Kelly and Ben Doyle. And so that was a big disagreement I had on that part. My dad was a good player, by the way. He was an engineer for Boeing. He's a 0 handicap, played in a number of USGA things, but he was good at reading the book, understanding it. But I saw that the head's moving when Carl and I are doing this research together, and the head's moving. And then as we start doing these studies, some guys are moving a lot, like Bubba Watson, from the address to just after he hits the ball, 17 and a half inches of head movement. Scotty Scheffler, 17 inches of head movement. Massive head movement. But everybody moves some, out and back, right and left. There's some movement. If you freeze your head, well, I don't need to tell you guys. We know this stuff now, but it's still being taught. There's still things being taught that surprise me. I mean, I'm still looking at Instagram and things. You never know what you're going to see. Another thing that was in the book was the elevation of the hips, the rising up of the hips. And with Carl and I, we'd look at how the pants would rise up when players hit. We knew that Bobby Jones was lifting his left heel off the ground at impact. I had a lot of, I worked with some great girls. One was Christy Kerr, and she's a small girl, and she hits it a long ways, but she came up this way off the ground. I worked with Christy since she was 13 years old. She was the #1 junior in the country, the #1 amateur, and then she got to be the #1 in the world in pro golf. Then Lexi Thompson. And I worked with Lexi. She came to my school when she was 8. When she was 14, she was leading an LPGA Tour event. After 36, She made the Curtis Cup team when she was 14. She was the #1 amateur when she was 14, and the #1 junior. But she came up on her foot and her foot moved. And a number of teachers came to her dad, Scott, and told him that that's wrong. She'll never be a great player. She's got bad footwork. And he asked me about that. I said, no, Scott, we're not changing that. Don't ever take that away from her. And so I was criticized for that, and she was criticized for that. But I just told her, don't ever listen to anybody. Just keep doing what you're doing. And now we're almost, I think teaching, this foot to up and back move, you're definitely seeing that with a lot of great players. And it's definitely a way of leveraging power into your golf swing. So I know Terry Rolls was talking about the individuals, and it's very important to understand what's happening for power generation in the golf swing. X Factor 2, that came out in 2004. I hired Dr. Rob Neal in 2003. Ramsey McMasters was a good friend of mine. Some of you might remember Ramsey was a really forward-thinking, great guy, and he got Dr. Neal to call me, and we talked in 2002 and whatever. I hired him in 2003. He worked for me till 2014. Now he had the machine, the AMM machine. We tested tons of people, lots of tour players. Phil, as you were saying, the guys don't want to put it on. When I worked with Greg Norman, I finally got him to do one swing, and he came up with all bad numbers, by the way, too. According to Dr. Neal, I said, geez, we better change these numbers here pretty quick. He's hitting it about 320 down the center on every drive. So really important to keep up, I think. I've tried to keep up with what's going on in technology and stay up with what's going on. But Dr. Neal, we had a great relationship. I still talk to him. I don't see him nearly as much now, but he was there every day. I think this is a video, I think. Maybe not. Is that gonna play? I think so.
Here's one of the most popular players in the game, and one of my favorite players, Sergio.
Not anymore, but he was.
He put an arrow on his chin to show how far the chin travels in the backswing. And as the club goes away, monitor the chin motion right there, and you'll really see it. Now, a lot of great players do that. At the top of the backswing, we see Sergio very braced again with his lower body. You notice that his hips have moved to the right. Now here at the top of the backswing, you can see Sergio has made a huge shoulder turn, very supple, but still braced up nicely on the bottom. He has drifted significantly away from the target, and you can see some bow in that right knee. Again, this is okay. He's right on top of the right leg. And the golf club is just short of parallel. You're going to see different positions at the top of the swing with every player. Look at that great X at the top of the swing. And now as we start forward, Sergio is really going to lower. That's that compression move that I've talked about throughout the tape. And you can see the tremendous lag of the golf club. Look at those legs moving forward, shoulders following, and then fully through to a complete finished position with that right shoulder really going forward. Here's one of the most popular.
So that was, Garcia. That was part of the DVD in 2004. Now, Matt Rudy wants new stuff. I got to come up with a new letter. So,
we're back around to A.
Yeah. So this is called the Y factor. Terry, you referred to it. And this was a line I drew up from the lead hip straight up, and where would it hit the shoulder with the driver. And We did a article, Mariano Bartolome, a really fine teacher, worked for me from Argentina, really helped me with this article. And we looked at how far that shoulder moved, how far down it moved, who moved it the most. Actually, Tiger Woods moved it the most, 19 inches in this article. And of course, VJ has he's like Gumby, and so much movement in his swing, a lot of action going on there. So the Y factor was okay. I don't think it was great, but it was okay. These are the swing studies we do. That's just one from 2013, just an example. You can see the different releases there. It's a tremendous difference between Luke Donald and Westwood. But we do it, the whole tour. Or let's say we at least try to get 100 people into it. Every teacher does one thing. So we try to take the confirmation bias out of this thing as much as possible. That's the way I tried to do it. So is the left heel lifting or not? Is the club parallel at the top, past parallel, shorter parallel? Is the face open, closed, whatever? And they just do one thing, not everything, just one thing. And then I had a lot of teachers at Doral. I was at Doral for 26 years, but we would have over at least 20 teachers, maybe 9 or 10 assistants. And then PGA West, we'd have another 17 there. So everybody would do a study. We came up with a lot of information. This is kind of how the studies work. Just an example, that's Scheffler looking at his club face at the halfway at step 2. What's the club face like? So he has it just 1 degree down. Almost nobody, Brian Harmon has the face open at step 2, but that's about it. So quite a few guys have it very toe down. This is just another video here of Wilco, who averaged 347 for the year with the driver. And he's 6'2", got long arms, long moment arm for sure. But when I looked at that swing, he has so little hip turn. And generating that kind of incredible speed, and also not a gigantic shoulder turn. And he's a good player. I mean, he's not a long drive guy. He's like Bryson. I mean, he's a great player. Maybe not great, very good player, very good tour player. Let me see if I can switch out of here. Yeah, I got Big John. This is John Daly at La Costa at Carl's studio. He's a young guy. Now, Tiger Woods said he was the most talented player he ever played with. And you think about John's lifestyle, what he ate, what he drank, the gambling, the women, did everything that's impossibly wrong. And it just shows you, when you've got great talent. That is in probably 1990, a long time ago. I've seen John hit some drives that, with a wooden club. It's just unreal. It's just beyond belief. And he's not big. He's about 5'9". So, yeah.
Most of the videos that are in that studio, like I've seen a bunch of guys, are they all about right around 1990?
Through the 80s, this could be the late 80s, early 90s. Yeah, that's Carl's studio. He was there in the 80s and until about 1992. Yeah. Let me see if I can. For me, the biomechanics, Sports in Motion was a group out of New York. They came down to Doral in 1994. That's a study they did with Christy Kerr. And so I was interested. They had a cube that you went into. It was a red cube, and you went into the cube, and it's pretty interesting. So there wasn't golf biomechanics. That just started coming in the 90s, and now moved way forward. But that was the first biomechanics that I had used. This was I actually did a DVD on this on the power line of where the body was going through the ball and the angles of the wrist. There had been a lot of teaching trying to recock the club, or where the club went to after impact with the driver. And this was just I thought, an interesting study on how the body worked and also how the club worked. And then this is my final one. This is called the grind session. And we started doing these body drills in my golf schools starting in 1991. Actually, I did golf school starting in 1985, where we took people and we went to different places. We took traveling schools. I actually talked to Chris Cuomo about this a little bit. Traveling schools where you take groups and you go to a resort, or we'd go to the Bahamas or to Jamaica or to California, and we'd bring people, and I'd bring my teachers with me. And it was fun to do, but you can't make any money. It's a stupid business deal because you pay for the flights and the food and the teachers, and and the resort fees and tips, and it just wasn't any money left. Even though we charged quite a bit of money, I'm lucky I didn't lose money. I pretty much broke even. But this idea of when I take these people here, I take the club away from them, and we start with just the stance and the body, balancing the body, getting the arms on the chest, and start doing movements and showing people how to move in my golf schools. And then we put the arms on, and then we'll give them a stick, and we'll do one-handed and right and left-handed swings. And then we'll put the club in their hands, and then I do those for about 45 minutes in the golf school. And one of my teachers here has been with me for 35 years, right there, Glenn Farnsworth. Great teacher, great guy. He said, man, we call it the body drills when we started. We do a body drill session. And he said, you grind these people so hard. Let's call it the grind. And that's what we started to call it, the grind. And that's really actually working with people in groups. I do it with tour players, but in groups where we get them to really start to feel what the body is doing in the swing. When I ask a person, what should your body be doing in the swing, you get the deer in the headlights look, because that's like not really something they've tuned into, more so now. But where should you be at address? Where should you be at the top? What should you feel like at impact? And where should you be at finish? They're not too good at it. Haven't thought about it too much. But I'm happy. Yeah. I wanted to finish up here. I just had a couple things to say just to finish up. I think I've used my time pretty much. I just wanted to say, I've been really lucky to have great mentors in my life, and I've been able to travel the world because of golf. And I landed in great places, which was really lucky. I started at Westchester Country Club. We had 1,800 members, 45 holes of golf, a tour event. I played in the tour event a couple times. I knew the players already, but I got to know them a lot better there. Then I went to Sleepy Hollow later on, and we had a senior tour event for 6 years that I was there. I built a studio right on the range. I think it was maybe the first one where we had a performance center. It was a small one on the back of the range. When I went to Sleepy Hollow, they built the back of the range for me. They built a road in because I told them I was teaching quite a few tour players. I was teaching a lot of amateurs that weren't members, so they could come down to the back end of the range there. Cameron Young grew up his dad followed me as the pro. That's where he grew up, at Sleepy Hollow. But having that video room where we could hit balls right out of the studio, and then I did that at Doral. And now a lot of people have them, and then you come to a place like this. I mean, it's just unreal how great this is with the nice indoor video rooms. I love the idea of being able to go outside and inside, be able to hit from inside to out. That was my idea. and that really, really helped me with my teaching. Doral for 26 years, the tour event. PGA West, 17 years. Mayakoba, Mexico, 14 years with a tour event. Access. We could put the tripods out easily. I had all my guys go out. We could put the tripods on the holes. By the way, if a guy could get 2 or 3 good clips out of a whole day of videotaping, out of being out there for 8 or 10 hours, that was good. Because a lot of things have to happen. Somebody could walk in front of you. The guy hits a bad shot. He tees off over on the side. You got to be, you had to have everything work just right. Of course, being Carl at La Costa, he was always able to film there and at San Diego. So easy access to the tour, easy to bring the tripods out. Big staffs. Designing the studies, so we took that confirmation bias out of there. When I wrote the 4 turns in the golf swing and turned that in, it kind of opened the floodgates for me. I moved to the Golf Channel. I went full-time to Doral, full-time teaching. I'd been the director of golf. I taught a lot, but still, I had to, run the operations too. I went into full-time teaching. Speaking at events like this, being able to learn a lot more from a lot of other great people. Michael McTagg was in the audience and called me, which was a big deal for improving that article on the X Factor. And now we've got better tools. We've got better ways to communicate, more accurate ways to talk about power. I think the ideas in the X Factor, which included the X, taking the X to impact, the numbers in that book, they've stood up pretty good. They've stood up pretty well. Thanks a lot for coming. Enjoyed it. I don't know if there's any questions. Are we supposed to do that? Yes.
Are you supposed to?
Or are we out of time?
You can. We have an extra 15 minutes before break, before food, so.
Okay.
Sure. Do you have 1 or 2 short stories about Homer Kelly
Yeah.
and Ben Doyle?
Yeah. Well, I went to Homer Kelly's house, and it wasn't too far from my home in Seattle. He was not a good player. He had his little bag. He had a pull card at the time. Pull cards are good now, but back then, if somebody was having a pull card, that was a bad sign. And he had his little towel on there, and he had old clubs, and he didn't have head covers on his wooden clubs. So I'm looking at that, and I asked him, his handicap. He's not too good. So I'm thinking, wow, what am I doing here? And then we talked, and he's there for a while in his home, and his wife was there, super nice lady. And you had to sign a book when you came in. I think that book's still probably around. So you sign a book, and then we went back to the garage. And in this garage, he had all this stuff in the garage. And one of the main things was a plastic plane. And that's where Mac O'Grady got a lot of the stuff from. Of course, he credits Mac O'Grady. I mean, he credits Homer quite a bit. But about putting the club up on the plane angle here pretty early. I mean, like Mac put it up there pretty soon with the left wrist to put the club up, and you'd slide it up and down. And then he had a lot of other gadgets to show how things load and unload. I spent about 5 hours with him, listening to everything. Went through the book, gave me a book. And then Ben Doyle spoke so softly. So a lot of you have listened maybe to Ben teach, but he had like 500 things in a bag to use, and he had the mop, of course, for mop dragging going through, and had a lot of really cool things. I had a school in Texas for 14 years, and he came out and did some schools at my place there, which was interesting. I learned a lot from the golf machine. There was a lot of great stuff in there, and I learned a lot from Ben. There's certain things that agree with and disagree, but I like the structure, and that's why I did that with my teachers. For me, with my teachers, I wanted to have them to have their ability to teach their own way. Backswings were all different on the PGA Tour and the LPGA Tour, but I wanted to show them, where the zones were. I had outside of the zones, I called them death moves, which was pretty radical back then. If you were outside of those things, then I changed it. I taught my teachers, hey, this is not going to work.
Did you know Ben in Seattle? Or
Yeah.
Not until
No,
Carmel?
Seattle, and then I took lessons from him in Carmel when I was down for the tour school. I lived in Carmel for about 3 months one time. I took quite a few lessons from Ben. But he was very quiet, and he memorized the book. I mean, memorized it, every word, every line, everything. And the 10 million components that could go into the geometrical, how far things could go with the golf machine. It was just amazing. But he knew the thing inside and out. And he's really the guy that really brought it out to the world. I don't know, anything else? Okay. Well,
Do you want to talk about Welty and watching Welty teach, let's say, Annika or Freddie Couples?
yeah. Well, Carl was an amazing teacher for a guy that said very little. He really minimized teaching. He would show you a lot of video. He'd show you what the great players are doing compared to what you were doing. I think he did some great work with Annika on his putting. I think Carl was still the best with putting. Derek Ueda, who's working with a lot of tour players, is 100%. He came to see Carl, later. I saw Derek quite a bit at PGA West. That's when he came out to see Carl. But he spent a lot of time with him on putting, and Carl was interested mostly in what the ball was doing. And he put the stripes on there way back. He was very involved with Callaway, Mr. Callaway, and how they did things in setting up the Callaway studios. He was way, way out there advanced. It's just that Carl didn't talk much. I mean, he didn't want to be in a crowd. He would never come do this. He was, he was a very super protective guy. I sent tons of people to see him, and I sent some teachers that didn't work for me to see him, and I had a couple people come back and say that they didn't think he was that good, and that was really, wow. You never know. Maybe caught him on a bad day, but he would mostly show you, and he knew what Nicklaus was doing. He knew what Tiger Woods was doing with their short game, their putting, their chipping. He watched them 1,000,000 times. He was very, very detailed on every little thing that he did. And he would study hours and hours and hours of looking at Tiger Woods' putting, his chipping, his pitching, how he set the club, what the face angles were, all of that stuff. He was unbelievable on that. Does that answer it good enough? Yeah.
What happened to all those videos, Jim?
Craig's got them, his son, Craig Welty. He saved most of them. He's working on, trying to get them out of all the different systems that we use. A lot of it was in JC Video. So, and it was on the old stuff, so, to kind of convert it into, streaming video now. So he's doing it. It's expensive to do, actually. He's got about 1,000,000 videos in there, Okay, thanks very much. See you.